into a lot of the spaces we would vacate as a consequence of that. Now, as the study unfolded, if you've taken a look at it, you'll only see diagrams, test diagrams downtown. And the principal reason for that is that that was the preferred choice. I think when we look at lots of other factors in terms of the community, downtown development, reinvesting in the downtown, realizing that attorneys and support services are downtown, I think the preference of the committee at that time was to focus on that as the solution and the option. And then the real issue got to be, how do you develop that addition? Do you cuddle it right up to the courthouse itself, or do you create some space between the courthouse? And that really is an aesthetic question more than anything else, and a question of preserving the historic facade and hopefully, you know, augmenting it, featuring it in the design. But that's why I say you won't see any test designs of a new facility, partly because it's not quite as necessary, because the real test out here is do things fit, and what's it take to make it fit. And so what the concept in the report focused on was an addition that basically was only 2 stories tall and tried to take advantage of the fall of the site to keep as low a profile as possible, so as much of the historic facade would remain exposed and not covered up or obliterated by the design. So, and when we looked at the addition, it says in the book, and it may be a little bit deceptive, it talks about 3 options. It's not so much 3 options as 1 option shown in 3 phases with 1 variant. And the 1 variant was whether or not we actually brought traffic courts here as well. The argument to bring traffic courts here is that all of your state's attorney, clerk functions, judicial functions, and administration are all in one place. The public knows that it's all in one place. So when they go to court in Kankakee County, it's a one-stop. They don't have to, and I heard you talking about the issues of your county boardrooms. Do we have a committee here, a committee there? Is it confusing to the public? Well, there is a value to consolidating all court and court-related functions in a single place to the greatest degree possible. The potential downside is not so much the space of the traffic courts, but the additional parking demand generates. Because if you've ever gone through traffic court or had the pleasure, as I have, of appearing in traffic court, there's usually an army of people, and there's a very, very long list of folks that the judge has to go through before they get to you, and it generates a tremendous parking demand. So I think the biggest question on the traffic courts was not the space for the courtrooms themselves as it was the additional parking demand that would be generated. So I don't know if that's too quick of an overview, but that, you know, try to give you a flavor of what we did and what we were coming up with and what the issues were.
Well, thank you. Like the chairman said, the purpose of this was just to give everybody an overview of what the report was, because in the future we may have to start making some decisions about it. So we want to continue this process. I appreciate you coming, and if there's any questions, Mr. Lynn.
Refer to parking.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You've referred to parking a couple of times. What are the challenges in terms of building up rather than building out in terms of the parking facility?
You mean in terms of on grade versus
in terms of
structure?
having 2 or 3 story parking facility as opposed to something that would spread out over a longer.
Yeah, well, I know even from the earliest days, and you know, I always thought at some point down here a parking structure would make the most sense, because it could do a couple of things for you. One is it keeps the proximity tighter. You know, if you look at the diagram of available parking, it's a little here and a little there and a little here. So it's always going to be kind of a hunt and peck on behalf of the public to find their spots. It makes it difficult to find a place that has adequate parking if you want to have secured parking. And that's another sort of side issue. You know, many jurisdictions provide a certain amount of secure parking for judges, key officials like the state's attorney, or others whose cars might be subject to vandalism if defendants knew whose car it was, or, you know, even assaults in parking lots and things like that. But one thing about a parking structure too, and we've done this before, is you can segment it. You can have, say, certain levels be public parking and then actually gate it as you move up, and then upper levels can be some of that secured or at least restricted parking. But one thing that, if you can't find sufficient surface, and again, if you're looking at a demand of 720 over the long term, we have to find surface and or street in that kind of a combination to get the job done, and I think that's going to be difficult as time goes on.
Mr. Lee.
Thank you, Chairman. Good morning. We have empty lots right now. I just spoke earlier. and they're on a hill. It would be very easy, I'm not an architect, but
Yeah.
it'd be easy to put a two-story parking on a hill like that.
Yeah, I've seen lots like that. We saw one in High Point, North Carolina, where we were working on a court project. They actually did that. They took took advantage of the grade, and they actually had a couple different entry points. It was free public parking, so they didn't care about gating it. They actually had an upper level and lower level entry point, just depending on where you were coming from.
That's immediately across the street from the courthouse, so, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bernard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a question. Do you know of any other jurisdictions where they stagger the traffic court throughout the day to
yeah.
save money and reduce the parking issue?
That's one thing that I think we ask on a routine basis. It's very difficult to get agreement on that point. You know, because we have a, and I won't say where it is, but we have a court project under construction in Illinois right now. And one of the big topics of discussion with the judiciary was whether or not we could stagger. In other words, you know, tell one city to write its tickets for 8:15 appearance, another to write their tickets for an 8:45 appearance, or do something like that so that we don't have them all at once. We couldn't get that done because the court thought that that would be too inefficient from their point of view, i.e., if you only have a handful of tickets written at the 8:15 time, you get them done in 10 minutes and then you sit for 20 minutes waiting for the next batch of folks to come in. So we didn't get that done, but the consequence of that is kind of as you anticipate. We had a whole lot more parking, where in this particular case we had a 300-car parking lot, and based on our experience with the way that court works, by 11 o'clock it probably was down to about, going from a full lot to about 30 cars in the lot.
Oh, just to follow up, if I could.
Yes.
What about just staggering them like two traffic calls a day versus
Well,
just one at 9
any
a.m.?
staggering, if it can be achieved, would help, because the point I was making is we have, at the end of the day, we had to provide a lot more surface parking than we might have. We had much longer and deeper queuing lines through magnetometers, more magnetometer stations for security checks on the way in. And actually, we wound up with two high-volume courts with a 150-person gallery in each one. And we had to get a Supreme Court exception to allow that because the Supreme Court limits most galleries to 85.
And how many hours a day are they used?
Well, those courts, probably 2 to 3 hours in the morning.
Okay, see, to me, that's wasteful. I'm sorry, and I'm not an architect, but to me, it's very wasteful. And I can see the difficulty in trying to tell communities, well, we're going to stagger your court appearances 15 minutes apart, but a twice-a-day thing is reasonable. It keeps the lot relatively full. It means less expenditure to begin with. I think we need to look at that.
Yeah, well, the question...
I mean, it's just common sense.
Sure.
It's plain old common sense.
Thank you, Ms. Bernard. I think those are some issues that obviously, once we get farther down the road, we need to discuss further. Mr. Bosser.
Is there any other courthouse functions that you see or any other communities see that can be pulled out of a courthouse, out of the courthouse envelope and moved to another site?
If you're a larger jurisdiction, it's easier. You know, in the case of the Will County facility that you share, the juvenile facility, at their scale, even though it wasn't their first choice, it works pretty well to pull all the juvenile court functions out. Because we have 2 juvenile courtrooms, we have all the Will County, you know, the state's attorney's office, probation, clerk for the juvenile operation. That if you had to break away a court function, traffic is obviously one, but that's another one. But it usually helps to be of a large enough scale where your volume of cases is such that it makes sense. In your case, one of the pieces that we did leave out, at least in this study, was probation. We didn't roll that back into the facility. And, when we worked with probation offices in the past, that has always been a candidate to ask, because in some cases, philosophically, they like being somewhat separate from the courts. They don't like to be right in the mix of the courtroom. So that's one that we, in fact, did leave out of the mix here. We left it in this building, if I'm not mistaken.
In the annex.
Annex, I'm sorry.
I don't know if you're aware, but we're in the process right now of moving public defender offices out of the courthouse, and that was out of necessity more than anything. We needed the space, and we found some space outside.
Yeah, at least insofar as the study is concerned, we had them in that expansion.
Any other questions for Mr. Kimme this morning? Thank you for coming in, thanks for the presentation.